Hello, friends. My message is coming to you 2 days early for a change. The reason is big undertakings at my house the next 2 weeks. Renovations, repairs, lots of excitement. So I won't be able to be back with you until August 22, and I look forward to it already. But before I plunge in, I must share with you that last week's talk, I love this word politicians use, I misspoke. I said Confucius had lived 1,000 years ago. And some of you must have caught me on that, but too polite to set me straight. 2 minutes after the talk was over, and I was in cyberspace, I realized I gave you the wrong date. Confucius was 2,500 years ago. Okay, now that I'm an honest woman, let me share with you some really very burning thoughts I have right now. I've spoken before about that 1947 trip that my family took, the first trip after the Second World was over. Had gas, rubber for tires again, and we hit the trail west. Many of us young people there in the car had never been west before. We were particularly aiming, of course, for as many national parks as we could see, and one of them was the great park Yosemite. Now, my parents had been there before in the early 1930s, somewhere around 1931 or 32, and they went over the Tioga Pass when it was still a dirt road, and a rather narrow one at that, with my mother at the wheel. And believe me, she never let us forget it. Yeah, the great Yosemite. We were particularly eager to see that phenomenon, the firefall, that had been a nightly show in tourist season for over half a century. And hundreds gathered there at Camp Curry after dark, looking up this 3,000 feet granite cliff. And then the call came down in Camp Curry, I guess through some kind of bullhorn. "Hello, Glacier Point," they shouted. And then way up there came the answer. "Hello, Camp Curry." And then Camp Curry set out the call, "Let the fire fall. Let the fire fall." And the big bonfire, I think mainly of wood chips that had been burning up on the top of the cliff all day long, was bit by bit shoveled over the edge and fell like a great stream of fiery water, a real river of fire, all the way down 3,000 feet. It was an awesome sight. And we just stood there, hundreds of us, transfixed by the sight. And then in the middle of the total silence came a hoarse scream, "Heil Hitler!" My father turned around and responded in a voice we had never heard before. It seemed to fill the world. "Damn Hitler!" Our family looked at him in total astonishment. None of us had ever heard him use a swear word. My father, a calm, rational professor, shouting out 2 words like that with hundreds listening. By then, 1947, you see, the world knew of the horror and extent of the Holocaust. When he spoke, it was not with rage, but with calm, almost cosmic authority, almost a pronouncement from nature itself in that awesome night. Clean, total anger. Now myself, I know that anger when I see corrosive injustice, but with me, unlike my father, it often disintegrates into rage. And rage is very different from clean, powerful anger. Rage is toxic in the body and in the atmosphere. In my 90s, when I hit my 90s, and by the way, I'm 98 now as of several weeks, and one of these days I'm going to have to change my title. But that was one of the big surprises, that I was capable of the amount of rage I felt that surged up periodically these past 10 years about what's happening in our country. And I'm feeling it, the surge of that beginning again today. What is happening to that 85-year-old man who still gives his life working for the healing of humanity? I'm talking, of course, about the great Dr. Fauci, who is up now being pilloried before the world. This man graduated first in his class at medical school. In his lifetime, he served 7 presidents as advisory capacity. For years, he was the head of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. Also, many years member of the National Institute of Health. When the AIDS epidemic hit, his cures, his research, his cures, they estimate saved about 20 million people in 50 different countries. He was awarded the Medal of Freedom by George W. Bush. Then COVID hit. Many of us have already begun to forget what that was like when it hit 6 years ago. Like death itself cutting a great scythe through the nation. Hundreds dying every week. Cause unknown. The horror of it was, of course, that it was contagious, wildly contagious, even before symptoms began to show in the other people. While Dr. Anthony Fauci and others, he's spearheading the effort, were working madly to try to find some kind of vaccine or cure. The only thing to do immediately was to stop it, not to stop it, but at least to slow it through social distancing, masking, closing schools, closing many businesses, curtailing travel, exactly the same kind of thing that the nation had to do during the deadly flu epidemic of 1918-19. Exactly the kind of thing our communities did during the great polio epidemics, which I remember so well. Everything closed down, masks on, no public assembly. That was the obvious way to slow it down until cures and vaccines could be found. But of course, This didn't suit Trump at all, or his administration. People wearing masks, people kept out of school, businesses closing, the effect it had on the economy, never mind that 1 million people ended up dead. It looked bad for the administration. Now, this great Nobel Prize winner, which of course Trump can't stand that thought, now Senator Rand Paul, himself an ophthalmologist surgeon, but no experience or training, as far as I know, in infectious disease and epidemics, along with the Secretary of Health, Robert Kennedy Jr., who is neither a scientist nor a doctor. They are spearheading the effort, egged on by Trump, to destroy this man who's probably saved millions of lives. He's recently taken the Fifth Amendment because he'd already been questioned by a number of congressional committees. He'd already answered these questions. Now, of course, they subpoenaed his private diary to shame him, blame him for expressing his pleasure at meeting famous people. He lived pretty much in spite of his work in the shadows before. Blaming him for the fact he asked questions sometimes about his methods, as what good scientist doesn't. They're blaming him for the shutdowns. They're blaming him for the social distancing and the closing of various institutions. Not that he enforced it, he advised it. It was up to the governors of each state to enforce it. Already today, this morning, that committee, spearheaded by Rand, Kennedy, and egged on by Trump, the senatorial committee has decided to turn the matter over to the Department of Justice and to urge them to bring legal charges of contempt of court against him as of today, without going through, mind you, the vote of the full Senate. Trump has said today what he did was far more serious than a lot of crimes. They're trying to get him condemned and imprisoned. Now, some people feel he made a great mistake taking the Fifth Amendment at his last questioning. I wonder if that was because he'd been studying what happened to the great Dr. Oppenheimer 72 years ago. I remember that time. That father of the atomic bomb, working night and day in Los Alamos to develop this weapon before the Nazis did, and they were very far on their way to developing it. They dragged him before committees. Later on, accusing him directly in all the newspapers, headlines, that he was a communist spy. Questioned for weeks in kind of a kangaroo court without being allowed witnesses in his favor. I don't know if he was allowed a lawyer. You remember just the other day, Dr. Fauci's lawyer was forcibly escorted from court, the committee meeting, not allowed to have it, which was unusual, even in the days of Joseph McCarthy. This great Oppenheimer, and I had the honor of meeting him in 1946, less than a year after the end of the Second World War. He was meeting with a group of United States atomic scientists to give a manifesto to the nation and the world of what they had done to save the world from Nazism and fascism, but warning the world this was a great, dangerous power. Oppenheimer resisted the effort to develop the hydrogen bomb. He resisted the effort for the surplus of one bomb after another. The nation at that time was in a state of paranoia. The Russians had discovered how to make atom bombs, and Oppenheimer was accused of selling this information to Russia. A total lie. He never joined the Communist Party, ever. Some of his friends as young people and his wife as a young woman had become, for a short time, communists. That was not unusual in the 1930s for young idealists in the midst of the terrible, destructive depression to be looking at other methods of feeding the poor, starving, downtrodden. Most of them left after they'd realized that it was Russia pulling the reins of every communist group. Oppenheimer was eventually, after nonstop questioning, sometimes sessions going on as long as 27 hours for several weeks, stripped of his security clearance. He who had been the head of the Atomic Energy Commission for years, it broke his spirit. It almost destroyed his reputation. You know, there's a bitter old saying, a dictatorship is a country in which a street is named after you in your honor one day, and you are chased down it the next. Well, I think Dr. Fauci studied what happened to Oppenheimer and knows these great scientists who are not legally trained, how easy it is for hostile lawyers to twist their words, catch them in seeming self-contradictions. He'd already testified many times before he wasn't going to do it again. I'm thinking back now to the firefall and my father's voice. And I'm thinking of that great prophet Amos in the scriptures, he who lived 2,700 years ago. Let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. The actual firefalls were stopped in, I think, around the late 1960s. It was too much of a fire hazard. It was a miracle it hadn't caused forest fires already. But now there's another firefall, which I just in recent times learned about, which I've never seen. It's an actual waterfall in that same, coming down that same cliff, called the Horsetail Waterfall. And now, in the tourist season, and I think it's for a week in February, some of you may have seen it, the setting sun, the rays beam light on this stream of water, and it turns glorious colors, almost as if it were fire, but now a fire made of light. Light. A river of light. Light are more powerful than fire, deeper, swifter, more healing. And when I feel toxic rage building up in me, as of today, I am asking the lover and sustainer of this amazing world and universe, by whatever name, to take this toxicity, it's a great burning power, to take it and transform it into the power of creative light. Let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an everlasting, ever-flowing stream. Thank you, my friends, for sharing with me, and I'll be back with you on August 22nd. See you then.